Colby Miller. I'm one of the marketing managers for DataRobot. We are one of the platinum sponsors here at Collide this year. We've been very pleased to be here. It's been a lot of fun talking to a lot of you over the past couple of days about where everyone is on this crazy AI journey, and we're going to dive a little bit more into that in our panel session today, the title of which is From Mirage to Mastery, Navigating the AI Landscape Beyond Empty Promises. So we're really going to take this in sort of three phases. We're going to talk with our panel here, who I'll introduce in a moment, about the challenges of increasing that AI maturity, getting on the road to getting real business results and outcomes out of AI, some of the challenges that some of the folks have experienced along the way in their journey. We're going to talk about what they're doing today, how they are leveraging AI for business results within the institutions, within the organizations that they work for and work with. And then we're going to talk about the art of the possible. And this is where we're going to touch on that wonderful topic that I'm sure everybody has heard ad nauseum throughout the conference here, generative AI, and what that means in real terms for business value moving forward. So we appreciate you all being here with you today. I am joined by a wonderful panel of folks directly to my left here who has been a star of this stage throughout the 2 days already. Miss Selma Dogic with Carter's. And if you don't know who Carter's are, they are the national #1 brand retailer for children's clothing and own Oshkosh Bagosh as well. Is that correct?
Yes, I do want to say that you're doing a great job and have made me question my moderating skills, because this intro, I'm living for it.
All right, good. Well, I appreciate your endorsement for sure. To my next in line here is Mr. Jason Harper. He is the managing director for RXA at OneMagnify, who is one of our strategic partners with DataRobot and is really helping to guide customers on that AI journey and really helping them to implement the solutions that are getting real results, and we'll talk about some of that in specificity. To his left is Miss Sarah Gibson, who is a analytics manager with Aflac, who, if you don't been living under a rock for basically the past 20 years, the #1 health insurance supplemental provider in the United States. And then finally on the end there we have Ms. Jessica Lin, who is a senior data scientist with DataRobot. And so we will be giving perspective of kind of some end users and end customers of AI and that are leveraging, and then of course with Jason and Jessica kind of chiming in on what they're seeing broadly across the customer set that we're engaging with. So I'm going to start off, Selma, if you don't mind, coming to you first. So maybe give us just a little bit of an overview of how you at Carter's are leveraging AI right now, and kind of briefly, but then talk about what were some of the challenges of getting there as you've seen that occur?
Yeah, so we've been on I'd say data and analytics transformation journey for the last 4 years. When I came into Carter's, we were really focused on kind of descriptive analytics, right? So telling the business what happened. We had a really central data and analytics team that was building out all of the dashboards and data products. And when I came in, we wanted to look forward to more predictive analytics, right? Diagnostic analytics, so telling the business what happened, how can you make something happen, and scaling that throughout. So there was a big focus on self-service analytics. When I look at now, right, our current landscape and how we're leveraging AI, we have the DataRobot platform that we're leveraging more as a citizen data scientist platform. So we're enabling business users to build and scale their own ML models. And really we're at the infancy of that journey, right? So we're building out a roadmap for each business function to say this is kind of the next best thing that you can do in your AI journey. And then to your point with generative AI, I think that there's, right, we're obviously on this hype cycle, and so everybody's really excited to figure out how we can leverage it. We do have an AI task force that's doing some exploration on what are those use cases for generative AI and how do we implement them in-house.
Fair enough. I think it's really good insight. Sarah, I want to come to you next, kind of similar question, right? From a Aflac standpoint and the work that you're doing within Aflac, how kind of are you leveraging AI as a technology today? And then what have been a few of those bumps in the road that maybe have occurred as you've seen that progress within your organization?
Right. So as you know, Aflac is a very older company. So trying to get buy-in from the business is one of our hardest challenges. I feel like it should be this way. And why is your model telling me something else. So us having to say, well, you want to just add a feelings button because it'll make it all better, has always been our joke, but really showing how the model works, how their actual features that we pick out are influencing our volumes and our projections has really been the best way for them to get a buy-in.
Gotcha. No, that makes a lot of sense. In fact, I know Selma sitting in on your panel that you hosted yesterday, that explainability issue was top of mind for pretty much everybody. And it's one thing to have the functionality of of AI within a platform and your data all put together, but at the end of the day, if the bigwigs in the C-suite aren't buying into it and aren't investing into it, it's not really going to go anywhere.
I want to add to that too. I think because of so much of the hype around generative AI, there's a lot of this push to like move fast, do something, right? And you kind of end up, if you appease, right, putting the cart before the horse. And I think that's like one of the biggest challenges in implementing AI or ML across organizations is really getting stakeholder buy-in, but buy-in in the right way, right? Like not just like, oh yeah, I care about it because it seems important in the broader landscape, but I care about it because I know that it's going to have a business impact and it's going to help me like grow my business, right? And that by far has been the most difficult.
Very good. Jason, coming to you, I'm guessing that this resonates with you is probably a tale that you see with the RxA OneMagnify as you are working with customers and almost being that counselor and consultant along the way of how to position that to their stakeholders and decision makers, right?
Well, I think, yeah, the what we're seeing is there's just such a wide spread now when we talk to organizations, like where people are at, and some folks are in the, oh my God, I need a task force, and I need all this, like, because I the leaders are hearing this from their peers, and they don't want to get left behind, and there's like this kind of fear of missing out mentality too, and it's like a race, right? And it's sort of like the constant reminder that we have is like, well, let's just take a step back. What do we want to get out of this? Like, we don't need an AI. Like, no, like what are we trying to do? And then can these things solve it, right? And so helping folks sort of deal with the hype cycle machine and that, and then really get back to basics of like, okay, like let's have a roadmap and a plan and we can execute this, right? So it's sort of like having those conversations. And there's a variety of people at different ends. There's a variety of sort of like folks sit across like that wide spectrum too, right? There are also some people who are at the other end where they're like, we're not ready. Like, and it's like, what do you mean you're not ready? You don't have a choice in this matter.
Right.
Like, I'm not saying like go race and dive off the cliff without looking, but I'm saying you need to start making progress now. Like, I was on the plane here with this. I just had to sit next to the CTO of a media company. So of course we got to talking, and of course I was shamelessly trying to sell him all sorts of stuff because he's stuck in a captive audience. And the conversation though, it was clear like he doesn't want anything to do with AI, machine learning, and all that. Like, that's a later thing for him. He's like, we're not ready. We got to do all this stuff. And he's telling me all this stuff. And it's like, there's a balance there. So it's helping folks sort of like get into that spectrum of making intentional, productive progress.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Actually, I was part of a panel on Monday at another event in Nashville. And that was a big talking point of if you are waiting until your data is all nice and tidy and buttoned up with a bow to start down an AI journey, like you're never going to get there. It's never going to happen. So you need to be thinking about these things in, simultaneously. It's not a consecutive like order of operations. So just to you, I mean, from a DataRobot standpoint, right? I mean, obviously the platform has been around at this point 9-10 years. You've been with the company, I believe, 6 or so, 6.5, is that right? And so I'm sure this is a common tale of that whole AI maturity curve, right? And how we are communicating to customers about that. How have you seen that evolve in your time with DataRobot?
Yeah. Evolving over time has been an interesting point where, yes, to your point, it can be very hard to get past that initial, I feel like this is always true. It's someone who's been successful in their field, who's someone who does have a really deep understanding. But then we have to go through that process of let's scale this, let's accelerate this, let's further personalize this, and making sure that their experience with that is still, it's still lived in, it's still true, but how can we improve upon this? Another flavor to that, though, is also working with the data scientists, which I do quite a lot, is trying to help them understand that yes, there is a data scientist way to do it. There's a certain way that you can say is the perfect path. However, we do still need to take the business stakeholder into account. So these feelings, their lived in experience, also need to be incorporated into whatever you're building. It may not be perfect. It may not be the exact way that you wanted to approach it, but it still needs to be incorporated.
Yeah. No, fair enough. I think so. I do like to pull the audience with these things a little bit of kind of on this concept of an AI maturity curve. If you wouldn't do me the favor of just you'll hold up a hand and hold up a digit of 1, 2, or 3. 1 being we aren't anywhere, we haven't started, or we're just barely starting. Our data's still a mess. We're trying to get a lot of things in order. We can't even go down that road yet. Number 2 being, all right, we've got some things in place. Maybe we've even built a model or 2. Maybe there's one in production, but we're still kind of dipping our toe in the water. And 3 being, we're getting value out of AI on a daily basis, multiple models in production, and we're really headed down that road. Let me just see kind of by show of hands and a digit of where folks are on that path. Yeah. So I would say this is, and I also give the caveat, if your boss is sitting next to you, just like do it low, right? Don't, you can do it quite subtly. But I looking out at it, you're a fairly typical audience, right? Of like usually 70 to 80% of the audience is in that 1 or 2 spectrum, right? Yeah, I saw a couple 3s, maybe one gentleman up here and maybe one over here. But that is a fairly standard kind of spread of that particular question, which is why these conversations I think are important, because first off, it's nice to hear specifically from those folks that are leveraging within the organization, also hearing that it's not perfect. It's not like it, even once you get there, it's still a constant work in progress, constantly have to be showing that ROI. And then, so I think it's good from a relating standpoint, and then talking about how from a vendor standpoint, we're looking to solve some of these issues and make that, path easier for you. Selma, come to you kind of on that point of like what you're doing today, and without giving away the secret sauce of how DataRobot as a platform, but what are some of the use cases you guys are leveraging within your org?
Yeah, so it's actually really funny. When I was preparing for this, I was thinking about like our journey over the past 2 years, and I remember some of the first use cases that we took under our belt in the COE always came top down. Right, so it was the CIO wanted to know this, we built a model. The CMO wanted to know this, we built a model. Right, so it was predictions around e-commerce traffic, because our channels, right, we have brick and mortar direct to consumer, and then we have our e-commerce channel that kind of operates a little bit differently. And during COVID, we saw a big spike. So what was happening to e-com after COVID? So we did a predictive model there. We built a model that would also predict or estimate the impact of marketing on demand, right? So like a big demand model that incorporated a bunch of different features. But what we really found was, because those were coming top down, right? They had these big ideas, it was top of mind. We worked really hard to spin up a model really fast. There was no due diligence before that to really it seems like they're bought in, right? But what's the feasibility of this model once we put it into production, it making an impact on the business, right? It actually changing decisions and people implementing those decisions based on the insights of the model. And because that hadn't happened, those models kind of ended up being shelfware, right? So they were in production, but they weren't being leveraged. Where we found the most success, and I would say that this is across the board, not just in the AI ML space, but also when we think about business intelligence, decision insights, right, is looking at the low-hanging fruit first. Because when I commit to a project with a business sponsor, what I think about and talk about with them is, what's the ROI, right? So what's the business benefit? Can we quantify that? But also, what's the feasibility, right? And when I think about feasibility, I don't just think about can we do the development? Is the development feasible? But I think about once we build the model, is it feasible that you have control over the decisions, right, to implement changes within your business processes to actually realize that ROI? And if the feasibility is medium and low, I'm likely not going to take that project on, right? I'd rather take on a project that has medium ROI and high feasibility. It's low-hanging fruit. I know I can do it, and I know I can like prove it to be successful, right? Like that I could actually implement the business change. Once you do that and you have that under your belt, it's so much easier to like expand into more complex use cases.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's funny as we're having this conversation, realizing that we've talked very little about, coding, right? Or the actual like nuts and bolts, the data science part of the machine learning and deploying of AI. It has a lot to do with culture, with
people.
Right, yeah.
And I would say too, like, this is something I didn't want to interject when you guys were talking about it, but like, it's almost never a data problem.
Right.
Like in the world that we live in now, there's data for everything, and even when it's really, really shitty data, we have processes in place, right, to like clean it up. We can augment that data. We can make it clean really quickly, right, like with all of this new technology that we have. So it's not a data problem ever. It's more of a people problem, right, a people processes problem.
Interesting. Sarah, to you on that, I mean, you talked about already, like, which is kind of the legacy mindset of the organization you work with, but you've gotten over this hump a little bit, I think, now, right? So what are some of the ways that you have finally kind of got some of that buy-in and seeing, AI models, have some results for you, use cases that you're deploying within Aflac?
Right. So one of our first, I would say, models inside DataRobot we did was, how when you go to Amazon, it says, people like you have bought this. Mm-hmm. Well, how do we personalize it for Aflac? And so we've taken our customer information and, we've kind of weeded out some data. We want to keep customers longer, so how do we make sure that happens? And then our agents are able to go into a sit-down conversation meeting with new potential customers and say, hey, plug in just a few information about us, and then we'll be able to say, hey, people like you bought accident or cancer because you want hospital or because, and be able to personalize it more. Mm-hmm. And that's actually in production across, and we're actually really able to see ROIs, which is a big reason that this was so successful. And I was just in a meeting last week about how do we expand this? How do we not just make it, new customers, how do we make it existing customers?
Right.
And that takes it, to a whole new level. That's one big use case. Kind of the thing we're working on right now is dormancy and keeping customers longer. How do we identify a customer that could potentially leave based on other customers who have left? And how do we implement something based on our model? Right. Like we see that they haven't filed a claim or they've called the call center 30 times. How do we mitigate that before they leave and try to get them back in the green, as we call it?
Right. No, fantastic. And I think the concept of the low-hanging fruit and something like a propensity to buy model, I think, is obviously one that if you're showing some bottom line impact, that's usually going to get some approvals up and down and maybe open up some other doors for go down other paths. Jason, I know that propensity to buy, use case within the healthcare space, I know it resonates with you and RXA with some of the work that you've been doing in the automotive space. Maybe speak to that from how you've gone down that road with customers and are showing that value from the models they've deployed.
Yeah, I think Jack probably spoke about this today. Jack's one of the, if you guys have a chance to talk to Jack, he's in our booth. For us, it's been, and for myself, especially doing this now for around 20 years, well, I guess 23 years, and seeing the realization, right? So in particular, when it comes to those types of predictive analytics and those types of use cases, that the level of granularity of the data that we have today and the power to be able to actually use tools like DataRobot, huge fan of DataRobot, by the way. And I think, seeing how, especially in automotive, where you have it's a very considered purchase, right? Insurance, very considered. Automotive, very considered. For most folks, it's like that second most expensive thing you're going to purchase next to your house. And for a lot of people, it is the most expensive thing you're going to purchase. And so being able to really get into granular lifestyle type data points, behavioral data points, and that combination of watching you sort of through this life cycle and being able to have really tailored, personalized communications being sent based on where you're at in this propensity and looking for those little indications of being able to say, oh, this has occurred, now you're likely, or now some, and being able to do that productionalized at scale, it's honestly really it's incredible that is the low-hanging fruit. That is incredibly powerful, incredibly valuable, and that is literally low-hanging fruit now. So it's like super exciting to see that because, you know, when I got started, that we were trying to do this stuff in Excel, which was a little bit difficult.
Right. Just from your standpoint of positioning DataRobot for customers, how do you go about helping them identify what that low-hanging fruit is, right? Well, what are those quick wins that we can get to get buy-in? How do you go about that conversation?
Yeah, a lot of brainstorming. We use, the past of everything that we've worked on across the past decade at DataRobot to try to kickstart some ideas. One way that I think is interesting to start a conversation, this leads to the feasibility, is asking, let's say we have the perfect solution. What does the implementation look like? How can we actually make sure this ends up impacting decisions, whether it be, an email that gets sent out, or it's a score on someone's, in a dashboard, or wherever it lives. It cannot die in a PowerPoint presentation somewhere. We have to imagine, let's quickly pretend that, the data science part is easy. We all know it's not, but pretend that we have the perfect solution. Now, what do you do with it? And sometimes that leads to more conversations of, maybe the people that we're talking to need to loop in more stakeholders. Maybe we need to ensure that, the IT team is involved, or whatever it is. This can help us get to what are the easiest things for us to do that will still derive value, where we can get to that end result as quickly as possible.
Right. No, that makes sense. Yeah, and I think that obviously the looping in the stakeholders, getting it widely across. I want to kind of switch a little bit on that note to kind of explainability and governance, right, of the AI in deployments. Okay, again, you're here. How do you continue to maintain the trust of the model and maintain the trust of your stakeholders in the model and what you're doing? And I guess an approach to that sort of explainability, piece of this puzzle.
Is that for me?
Yeah, it's for you. I'm looking
You're
at you. Sorry, Selma, yes, you take that.
Well, I think, right, like, whenever we engaged on a machine learning project, I mean, the bulk of it is really, it's because we have DataRobot and we're so thankful for it, we can actually do the development really quickly, but it's the iteration of it that takes time, right? It's like the testing against the subject matter expertise. Is this really, like, does this insight make sense? Like, is this what we're seeing against the ground truth? Is this what we're seeing like correlate to, like, true business outcomes? So doing a lot of that testing. Once we put a model in deployment, I will say that a little plug, and I don't want to be shameless about it, but with DataRobot, because they have the ML ops piece of it, we can really monitor the performance of our models to make sure that, again, they're maintaining their accuracy, but also when we see the data drifting, so the insights are kind of like drifting outside of the norm, we can then go and address that, and that's been really insightful for us. But it's always like that communication with the business leaders and with the business implementers has been really key. Again, it's really the people processes, and staying in line with them is what helps us kind of expand, right, machine learning at Carter's, and the explainability of it too. Again, it's just making sure that we're validating against the real world.
Right. Sarah, for you, is it from an explainability standpoint and that governance, how are you guys approaching, like, your governance of the models? That is a similar approach to what you're hearing from Selma?
Very similar to what she said. But I also think, as everyone has said, kind of bringing in stakeholders, it's helped us not be so siloed. And that was a big issue that we had, 5+ years ago, is that we did our own thing, and then the business did their own thing, and we kind of might have conflicting numbers that might not help. But, like, now that we're able to, I think COVID helped in a way a lot, made us reach out to people more. It has definitely closed the gap. So if they're kind of like, I'm not really sure, but, the model says it's great, we might go back and recheck, might try to do some different things because they know the business so well.
Right.
Could I just, adding to that, I think that breaking down of silos, and I think the number one thing that I've seen over my career, the number one most important thing when it comes to giving credibility, is that the business owner, business manager believes and understands that you, as a data scientist, understand the business. So it's not just about numbers and accuracy and things, but you actually understand that there's a consumer walking into a store, making a selection, having a problem, like that you really understand that. And if you can convey that to the business owner, that's going to drive a lot of credibility, and they're going to ask less questions about credibility, less like, is it da-da-da-da, because they're going to feel like, no, they have this. They're part of like the business. They're not this team over here to the side.
I feel like we maybe should have titled this session the human side of AI. Like, I think that we keep going back to that concept, right, of that it's, you know, the data science part, as you've mentioned, Jess, is not the easy part, but at the same time, it is about people issues and understanding the business. And so I guess, you know, and talk a little bit, Jess, from a product standpoint, because while you aren't shameless about the plug for DataRobot, I will be. But, you know, obviously, explainability, monitoring of the models, and we can even kind of use this to transition to that generative AI talk, because metrics and monitoring of Gen AI applications absolutely crucial. Talk about how that approach from a product standpoint for DataRobot and why that's so important.
Sure. I think we've talked a lot about governance here. I think something also important to keep in mind. Earlier today, I heard another talk where they mentioned human in the loop. So never forget that there is a human element involved, whether you're interacting with a person, someone's building it, you're creating this decision based off of someone's experience. There is still a human, and you need to take that feedback into, like, as you're using the model, either have a human in the loop to be part of this decisioning process, or as time goes on, you know, either build in guards. So as we're watching the drift, so, you know, as we're looking at drift over time, assessing how should we be changing the results of how we're using this model based on how people are actually using it. How you imagine, there is a difference between what you expect going in. You build a model, you have expectations, you want a person there to be involved in the process. That's a late notification over there. And people are gonna, the way that it's used in practice will continue shifting and evolving over time. This is incredibly true for generative AI. For predictive AI use cases, typically when your engagement, something shifts within the demographics that you're working with. That's typically where you see the drift happening. But on the generative side, you have this idea. Maybe you have a chat bot that's asking questions. Are people shifting the way that they interact with this bot over time? What kinds of information are you producing? How can you make sure that it continues to line up with user expectations over time? So the two sides are, like, within DataRobot, there needs to be humility in your models involved, because data science, as much as I love data science, I think this is an incredible field. It's never the end-all be-all. You need to have some humility in how the predictions are produced and how they're integrated into that end result. You need to monitor what's happening over time and continue improving and reframing what you've put out in the wild. And you need to make sure that you're staying on top of how your end user is interacting with it.
Right. Yeah. Did you have a follow-up on that? I could see the wheels turning.
Yeah, I can't help myself. I'm sorry. I think just what you're saying too. Like, when I hear that, I mean, I always believe that the dirty little secret of data science is that it's more of an art than a science. And so incorporating that human in the loop, the thinking of, like, it's never perfect, you just run out of time, is sort of like the same cause. It's something that's like evolving, and the human brain, and you're here watching and understanding and thinking is like critical regardless of what the machine is telling you.
Fair. No, absolutely. Again, the human side of AI. That's what we should have called this session. So, all right, if we switch to kind of talking more, kind of looking forward right now, and obviously generative AI being a big part of that, but we can't have that conversation without talking about the ethical element of it, right? Obviously, there's been multiple panels that have occurred here this week talking about the ethics of AI and of generative AI. You can't open up your phone or a news app without seeing that. I know for a lot of my family, when I told them I work for an AI company, they were for sure it was Skynet from Terminator. There's just perception out there, and rightly so, right, of the considerations of the ethical element. And even as Jason, you were talking about, like, the use case of kind of your customer life cycle, right, and the granularity of the data that is being considered there, like that has to come into play. We have to have that consideration. So I guess I'll start, Selma, with you from a Carter standpoint. What are some of those ethical considerations that are questions that are coming up either from your customers or within inside the organization about how to sort of ethically apply this technology?
Yeah, I mean, for us, the foremost kind of concern is actually around privacy, right? And so that has a little bit to do with the ethics of it. We want to make sure that we are being responsible with the people data that we have and own, and particularly around our customers, right? And so there's a big concern around that, and that's been the biggest consideration. But another thing that I've, even yesterday we talked about this, is that these models have real implications, right? Like real world implications. I mean, I remember we were talking with the global head of Randstad, data science for Randstad, and he was saying that like they use this to determine who goes to the next round on an interview, right? They use this to determine who to interview in the first place, and those can be like life-changing, right, decisions that you're letting a model make. And so same for us, like when we look at partnering with people analytics. These are life-changing, results sometimes, or decisions. Same thing around our customers, right? No, that might not be life-changing, but there are implications there. We want to make sure that we're being fair, that we're being inclusive, and that we value our core values, right, of inclusivity and diversity. So there are really kind of big implications around that, and I would say for us, especially around generative AI, it has always been around the security and the privacy risks, but of course, the ethical implications of it as well.
Sarah, I'm guessing again from your opening statement of kind of that mindset, maybe a little old school mindset of a company of this path down AI. What are some of those questions that you're getting, within your organization of the ethical considerations of AI?
So we have a whole team that basically just monitors that kind of information. And so, as I was talking about earlier, our suggestive selling tool, which, it was one of our first models that we put into DataRobot, we just threw everything at it. And when it came back, they were like, can't have that, can't have that, can't have that, can't have that. And we were so young and new, we kind of were like, let's just go for it. And we kind of were, the reins were held back a little bit.
Right.
And so we've now really focused on what is important. If it's not that, then maybe it's something else.
Fair. Right, and I'm guessing probably looking at now, you welcome that governance,
for sure.
right?
We for sure do. And sometimes we don't like what we hear always.
Right.
Because nobody likes to be told no. But it's going to help us in the long run.
Fair.
And I think if I can add to that too, I mean, in my past life, that I worked for a research organization. I was trained in economics, and there was always this like piece of the model that you couldn't account for, right? And it was like motivation, and it was your inherent bias. And so I think that's like a really important consideration also, that we are inherently biased, and if we don't acknowledge that, we can't do anything about it. And so like by way of development, right, and training the models, and there's bias in the data, if we don't acknowledge that, we can't handle that, the models themselves are biased, right? And so like, again, I just think that it's so good that we're having that discussion, right? Because then we can do something about it. We can make these models more fair. We can make the AI more equitable. And if we didn't, then just inherently we would be perpetuating that bias.
That's fair. Jess, come to you on this, because obviously from an AI platform standpoint, like to the Sarah's point of like we want to go just do it, we want to do it all. Like obviously that's we want to see how far we can push this thing, but what are some of the considerations ethically that you've seen within DataRobot over your time there, and going into the building of the platform itself?
Yeah, I really like the points that both of you have made. We've spent all of our time listening to customers, taking in that feedback, trying to build in solutions to some of these. Like we have compliance documentation that it automatically gets generated, and if you have a MRM team, a model risk management team, that can be something that is already pre-baked for you, and that's an easy way to interact with that risk management team. With the bias, that's something that we have thought about for years at DataRobot, ways to measure that, because data is only as good as the decisions that preceded it. So there are very easy ways to make poor decisions from the correct framework, But because the underlying assumptions there was an issue there, so detecting that bias and mitigating that bias, like these are all tools that we built into the platform to help speed along that process, and if nothing else, at least to raise a flag that there may be something that you need to be aware of. If there's nothing that you can change about the end result, at least be aware that this is a concern and may grow over time. We do have a team at DataRobot that is fully invested in how can we be ethical, ensuring that they're up to date on latest standards. Even like in EMEA, obviously there are many considerations there that need to be made that are just as important for the modeling process as the data that goes into it.
Yeah. Jason, I'm curious from your interactions with customers, particularly on the consulting side, as you're looking at implementation. I guess the first question is, who is usually the one that brings up the ethical considerations? Is it you asking, them, or is that something that they're coming to you with right off the bat?
Well, to be honest, I mean, this is really, it's such a, it's a gray area, right? And so, like, it's typically like client-led, right? So I don't really know, because a lot, like, we're obviously not going to do things. We have been put into some situations where we've actually walked away from business because we're like, yeah, we're not going to do that. Good luck.
Gotcha.
And so like we'll bring it up then when we're walking away. But when we're actually like deploying things, so it does come from the business, and so it comes from typically very senior folks in the business will question things. And I think the most glaring use case to me is when you look at in the marketing world in particular is this like AI-based customer lifecycle marketing. There's a point here when we get so much data on folks that the marketing efforts move beyond influence and into like, coercion, right? And you're going to have people doing things that are like so far departed from their best interest because this stuff is really friggin' powerful. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, but where is that line, right? Like we're at a stage where it's like it needs to be discussed.
Right. Do you think how much of that then, how much is the user kind of responsible there, like, or as opposed to the businesses that are pushing it out there, right? Because they'll just say, "We're just advertising, right? We're just advertising." And
but we're at a stage where no, right? So right. Like, yeah, it's subjective, and it has to be like that's where the human element's going to come back again, right? Yes, mechanically you're doing this, and mechanically, yes, we all have free choice. However, like no, right? So like that's where it's a shared responsibility too. I think it's the tools, the consultants, the clients, everybody in between.
Right. Oh, interesting. So, right in line with that, of like consideration of the power of this technology, right? We're in this world now of generative. I think that we're obviously still sorting through the noise of generative. I think, right? We obviously, I know I've got a chat GPT on my phone that I've leveraged maybe to print out some questions for this panel, maybe. And we're seeing it utilized in sort of what I would refer to as kind of these front-end things, meaning like within sort of business process, like a lot of sort of the front-end stuff, like, generating of questions for a panel or generating slides, all this sort of things that you can do where we maybe haven't seen yet so much like the output or business results that the power of generative AI can drive. How are you, Selma and Carter's, thinking about that now? What opportunities do you see with generative as you look into the future?
So I will say that I have kind of two frames of mind here. The first one being, right, like I will admit, are on this hype cycle, we're trying to figure out how can we leverage it, how can we be early adopters, right? And I think that the ways that are prevailing have been kind of people processes, right? So how do we augment these processes? How do we make people more efficient at the jobs that they're doing? And then how does that increase efficacy, right? So how do they do their jobs better with this, with generative AI? I would say that for me, though, when I think about like big picture, I want to use this as an opportunity to also kind of inform our strategic roadmap, right? Like our strategies around AI and ML. So, the Gen AI is just a piece of it, right? And so like, how do we approach this? How do we look forward in the next 5 years to say like, everything's gonna change, right? Like I can't tell you what this is gonna look like in the next 5 years, but I know that whatever the change is, this is how I'm going to approach it. Like these are the values that I have, these are my principles around decision analytics and data science. Then the other piece of it too is that I think that there's this huge unlock, and to your point of like, when we look beyond people processes, right, and the way that people work, is like, how does this like inherently change the way that we like live, right? So the way that we shop. Like when I think about our business, we care deeply about our products, our customers, right, our sales, and so like, how can I use generative AI to change the way that people shop, right, so that they're shopping better, so that they're shopping more, so that like that they're buying more of our products, and I think that that's going to be a huge unlock that I just don't think that we're quite there yet.
Fair. Sarah, for you, how do you see generative, not only within your organization, but within your industry itself, right, the insurance industry? What do you see, if you had to crystal ball that a year or two out of like how generative AI gets applied within Aflac and within your space?
So I think a lot, as she said, has to do with the people, the people processing the claims, the people taking the calls. How do we take generative AI to the next level that way? How do we make sure your bill is applied correctly to the right policy that way through AI? Right. That's the way I feel like that the insurance industry is going to go.
Fair. And I think it can apply to any number of industries, right? I mean, but beyond retail and health insurance, but even if we think about manufacturing and supply chain and all of these sort of things, there's a lot of opportunity there because there's a human element to all of those things. Just from a DataRobot standpoint, obviously now we too are trying to ride this hype train, right? We're scrambling to get generative AI capabilities within the platform because it's being called for. I mean, I've only been with the company for 7 months, and I know that we've completely changed our messaging and everything, in the time that I've been there around, generative AI. So, when you look at like what we have today, right, and the capabilities, but I know that you also are passionate about it's not just Gen AI in a vacuum, right? It has that predictive sort of legacy AI, if you will, element to it as well. And I know that this is something that you're passionate about, so take it away with that prompt.
I mean, just to set the context, generative AI right now is the absolute wild, wild west. Every day, it's changing entirely over again. And for me personally, this is a very fun time in my life because it really scratches that startup itch. I love going through and be like, this is a brand new problem. We're diving into this together. But so it's interesting to your hype cycle comment. I'm not fully sure that for machine learning that we're fully out of that hype cycle either. And we're just jumping straight in with generative AI. So from the DataRobot platform, our viewpoint is we do have an opinion, but it is changing day by day. So the goal is be as flexible as we can, be as interoperable as we can, be as open to how can we fit all these very rapidly changing solutions into a pipeline that makes sense. It's not just about experimenting. It's not just about building a use case, but how can we ensure that there is still real value at the end of the day? How can we make sure that we're still monitoring, that we're still governing the output of what comes out, whatever it may be? For chat applications, there is a very clear human in the loop. For some, that intersection that you just mentioned of where we have a combination of both generative and predictive, they're layered together. The intersection there is, I think, where we're really going to find value, but that requires extra work from stakeholders. That requires a lot of extra work from the pipeline. Governance of that is going to be a whole layer that we're all kind of discovering together. But flexibility is the most important part in this right now. Don't get locked into a single ecosystem that says, we have this vector database, we have this tool, these are what you're going to use. It changes every single day.
Right. So Jason, and I think we're about 5 minutes or so left to finish this up. I think we're in good shape there. But how often are you hearing, hey, I hear I need generative AI from your customers, right? And then it's like, give me some of that generative AI.
Yeah,
And how are you addressing that in the market? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, constantly, right? Like everybody, but it's that mix I was talking about earlier where some are like, I need a generative AI, right? And it's like, well, let's talk about this, right?
Yeah.
So really it's about finding those use cases, right? And like helping folks really understand like how it can be working. What we're seeing now though is this move to, I don't need Chat GPT because I don't want everything out there public. I need I need my own LLM. I need to train in my own personal data. And so we are actually having success with that. I think that's the real, when we get into highly personalized, right? I mean, from a business perspective, customized, right? Proprietary applications of it that are trained on your proprietary data that is not out there in the public. Like, that's what we're seeing. I think we deployed like our first one of those somewhat recently. And I think that's where we're seeing the biggest real value. I will say, when I look at this world, like there are real practical applications that are in play right now, and I see as a business owner, like my legal bills are going down because, like, holy cow! Like, if I were an attorney, like a contract attorney, I would be scared shitless because like you are no longer needed, and no business owner likes you. So like things like that are like, I don't know, that's fun.
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, guys, I think it's the type of conversation that will obviously continue on, in the halls here as we go forward and the conferences. First off, thank you to the panel for jumping up here today, particularly Selma and Sarah for joining us today. Jason and Jess, you guys didn't have much of a choice, but thanks for, making it on time. Jason particularly. No, but thank you all so much for coming again. My name's Colby Miller. I'm with DataRobot. If you want to continue this conversation with any of our panelists, we will be at our booth, which is directly out that door and next to the candy station for who else needs that afternoon sugar jolt. But we appreciate your guys' time very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.